If you would, let's open in our Bibles. Hebrews, let me invite you to join me. Hebrews chapter 11. We've just started last week a new series called Certain. And in this series, we're going to be exploring the examples of faith that we find listed in Hebrews chapter 11, kind of looking at their lives and looking at the testimony that the scriptures give us about their lives and understanding that and applying that for our lives today as we define and understand better what faith actually is. So that's going to be our series, just trying to shape an understanding of biblical faith. You know, we spent a lot of time in Galatians. And in Galatians, Paul was talking about works of the law, works of the flesh, the covenant, keeping the covenant, and kind of sets that against faith in Christ Jesus. So I wanted us to follow that series with just developing our understanding of faith and understanding a little bit more about what does the Bible mean when it talks about faith, because I think there are a lot of misunderstandings about faith in our culture, in our world today. As we begin our lesson this morning, I have a friend who, after retirement, I may have shared this with you before, after he retired, his name is Johnny, but after he retired, he had this idea that he wanted to hike the entire Appalachian Trail. Now, as I looked that up and could understand, it's a 2,160 quote-unquote plus miles. I think the plus miles is when you get lost and wandered off the trail, you know. But I was trying to think back. I believe it took him 6 months to hike the trail. And Johnny, once he started, he just started at ground zero and went through the whole thing and didn't stop. And it took 6 months for him to complete this journey. I didn't get the opportunity to talk to him before this morning like I wanted to. I wanted him to share some pictures if he had them, which I know he does. But knowing him, I can assure you of this. I've known Johnny my whole life. I can assure you that before he ever began this journey, he meticulously planned every step. I promise you. He would have known all the trail markers. He would have known all the rest points. He would have known resupply points. He would have known all the dangers and the trials along the trail. I promise you that Johnny would have researched this out as far as you can imagine. He would have studied and studied before he ever took a step. He could have told you about the vivid scenic views that he was expecting to see. And I know that from some of the photos, as I recall, that as he hiked, he was sending photos, and I remember seeing some just of meadows, just wide open meadows. And I'm like, how do you know where the trailhead is? How do you know where to go in this meadow? Other times it was rocks and cliffs that he was walking and hiking over. But can you imagine, after all that preparation, all that planning and research, if he had never actually stepped foot on the trail? Imagine if he had never actually walked any portion of the trail. See, faith is not just a concept to be understood. Faith is not something that we just spend time studying intellectually. But faith is to guide our lives. Faith is to guide our steps. Faith is to be practical. We can know about faith, we can talk about faith, we can talk about what it means to trust God. We can believe and understand the promises of God intellectually. But it's another thing to live by faith. It's another thing to live demonstrating our trust in God's Word, in God's character. And faith is to be lived. Faith is to be demonstrated in our lives. And in Hebrews 11, we're introduced to people who didn't just know about faith. We're introduced to people who didn't just talk about faith. We're introduced to people who lived and walked faith. It's more than knowledge. It was lived out in tangible ways, ways that aligned with God's purposes in the world. And this is the kind of faith, this is faith that you and I are called to live out in our lives today. Faith that's practical, faith that's powerful. Today we're going to briefly just look at the first two that are mentioned. If you are there in Hebrews, we're mainly going to be dealing with chapter 1, verses 4 through 6, but it's kind of this whole section. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 6. We're going to look at Abel and Enoch. And I think if you look at this, chapter 1, verses 1 through 6, you can see that they kind of group together. And it's in verse 7 where we really launch into these faithful witnesses that we're going to speak about later in this series. But I want us to know that faith is more than just a belief. Faith is trusting God. Even when it may seem like we're standing in an open meadow and we don't know which direction to go. Faith is trusting in God, even when the direction may not be so clear. It's trusting God that gives us as Christians reassurance, that gives us security. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pack up our backpacks, and you and I are going to set out on this trail together. We're going to move in this series from knowing about faith to walking faith. Knowing about faith to living out faith. Now, as we begin our trek and our journey, you're going to have to bear with me for a minute, because I'm going to get to the Bible nerdy stuff that I like, that nobody else really cares about, but you need to sit there and listen and just nod every once in a while that you're actually interested in this and you're following along with me, okay? So that's all I need, is just the occasional, okay, yeah, Steve, we get that, because I want to dive into this word just a minute, faith. I want to dive into understanding what it means. We know that we're reading an English word that's been translated for us, right? It's been translated from Hebrew or from Greek, Aramaic into English. So I want to dive a little bit into understanding the word so we know how to apply the word perhaps a bit. So as we go back into the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, faith in the word means to confirm or to support and establish. Now, I don't know Greek and Hebrew, surprise. But I have some tools that help me understand these words a little bit. And from that root word, we have a word in the Old Testament that derives faithfulness, reliability, steadfastness. And where we first read about this is in Genesis 15 and verse 6. No, it's not in Genesis chapter 1, all right? Genesis 15 and verse 6, where it says, Abraham believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Abraham was believing. That means he relied. The word of God was reliable. It was steadfast, and he was faithful to God's word. He believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now, as we move forward into the New Testament, of course, we're a different language, Greek, right? And the meaning, and as I understand, the word is developed a little bit more in the Greek language. The word in Greek is pistis, which I think we've all probably heard before. But the primary meaning of this word in Greek is trust, belief, confidence in something or someone. So trust, belief, confidence. And as we look through the New Testament, what we find is what it is conveying is this relational type trust or allegiance rather than just an intellectual understanding. Faith is more than just a belief, right? Faith is more than just an understanding. And that's what we begin to see as we search this word through the New Testament. It conveys a sense of reliance on God. It conveys a sense of loyalty. It's something that's active in our lives, and it shapes our actions. It shapes our perspectives, how we see things. And from the Hebrew Scriptures, from the Old Testament, we understand as well, faith is much more than just a belief. It's loyalty, it's faithfulness. And we see in the Old Testament, really, this word associated a lot with faithfulness to the covenant of God. Loyalty to God's covenant. So there's this covenantal type faithfulness that's developed through and interwoven with the Old Testament. But as we move into the New Testament, we begin to see the word develops a little bit of a nuance. Hebrews 11 and verse 1, which we spent some time on last week, but let's just notice again, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Faith in the New Testament, as we see, is presented as assurance and as conviction. More than just a belief. Assurance and conviction. Now, as we also notice there, we add another dimension to the word faith. It's assurance and conviction, and it also looks forward to the hope and the confidence that we have in the promises of God, even though they may not be seen. These people that we're going to look at, their lives that we're going to look at, they had a confidence in God's word, even though they did not see the realities in all cases in their lives. So let's dive in. Thank you for entertaining me a bit there for just a moment, but I think it's important to really just kind of, how do we define faith? What are we talking about? Because I think in our culture, right, we have this understanding of faith that it's something that's not really tangible. It's just a belief. And what I want us to see is the Bible doesn't speak about faith in those terms. The Bible speaks about faith as something that's actionable, something that's tangible, something that's seen. We could be talking about loyalty, right? How do we demonstrate loyalty in our lives? Right? It's one thing to say I'm loyal to something or someone, but then it's another thing to demonstrate that loyalty with our lives. So it's one thing to say I have faith in something or someone, and it's another thing to demonstrate the faith that we have through our actions. Do you understand? Right? They go together. It's not just understanding, it's not just belief. Faith is something expressed, lived out. Faith shapes how we understand things, how we view things. Faith shapes our actions. So let's notice Abel. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 4. Hebrews 11 and verse 4. You guys don't want to go to chapter 1 and verse 4, do you? We'd be a while going through Hebrews, right? Hebrews 11:4. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. Now, it's not a lot of text to go on, and certainly as we look back at the Old Testament, we're going to do that just for a moment, but I want us to notice that the author of Hebrews opens up a window of understanding for us when it comes to faith. Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. So let's go back a bit and let's capture the story from Genesis. Genesis chapter 4 is the story of Cain and Abel. And beginning in verse 1, Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. And in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions, from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Now, we are familiar with the story. We understand, and as we continue to read, that in jealousy, Cain murders his brother Abel. We're given some indication as to why God looked favorably upon Abel's sacrifice, but not Cain's. Cain, it says, look back at Genesis 4, if we're up on your screen. Cain brought the fruits of the soil. You notice that's all it says about Cain. He brought some of the fruits of the soil. But what does it say about Abel's offering? Abel also brought an offering. The fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. You see what Abel is doing? Abel's bringing something that's valuable. Abel's bringing something that means something to him, that's a sacrifice. He's bringing, as we say, the fat portions, that's the best portions from the firstborn of his flock. And I think there's something to be recognized here. Abel is bringing something before God that cost him. He is bringing a sacrifice. And it's almost like Cain is just grabbing some fruit of the field and bringing. Is there a cost? Is there a sacrifice? I don't know. But that's kind of what I pick up. It seems like the author in Genesis is really trying to help us see that what Abel brought before the Lord was something of value. What Abel brought before the Lord was something that cost him greatly. Because the wording there, I think, is quite unique. And it helps us understand Abel offered fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. And this story, as we go back to Hebrews, helps us understand what the author of Hebrews is revealing to us about faith. In verse 6, Hebrews 11 and verse 6, without faith, it's impossible to please God. See that? Without faith, trusting in God, relying on God, being loyal to God, without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. When we trust God, when we believe in God, when we are loyal to God, and we seek God, He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. Scholar N.T. Wright has this in his commentary. The point here, and this becomes clear as the chapter progresses, is that God accepted Abel and will reward his faith through and out the other side of death. Though he is dead, the account of his faith is still a powerful witness to us so much later. What we see in Abel is a trust and a reliance upon God, a willingness to give something that cost. He was offering an expression of worship, and he was demonstrating a trust and a belief in God. In the scriptures, we read about two people who did not experience death in the ordinary sense or in the way in which you and I did, Elijah and Enoch. Elijah in 2 Kings 2 and verse 11 was taken up to the Lord, and as well Enoch, Genesis 5 and verse 24. But the Hebrews author is pointing us to Enoch as an example of faith. Let's look at that. Hebrews 11 and verse 5. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. he was commended as one who pleased God. The example of Enoch, again, is driving us to the point that the Hebrews author is making. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Steve, you're repeating that. Yep, I'm repeating it for a point. This is what the author wants us to see and to understand. It's impossible to please God without faith, without belief and trust and understanding that he exists and he rewards those who diligently seek him. N.T. Wright, again, he notes, you have a general sense that there is a supreme divine being, and you may even have a suspicion that that being wants people to search for him. But unless you have faith, unless you really believe that God exists and that he does indeed want people to seek him and will reward them lavishly when they do, you can't actually begin to worship him. You can't actually begin to worship him. How do you worship something you don't truly believe in? Without faith, it is impossible to please God. We can go through the motions. We can look like we have a belief and a trust in God. But what the author is telling us is to look deep into our lives. Do you really? Do you believe he exists? Do you have confidence in him? Do you trust him? And are you seeking him? Because he is a rewarder of those who truly desire to know him. As we begin this introduction to Hebrews 11, this is the point the author is driving to us. He wants us to know, without confidence and trust in God, it's impossible to please him. And that, for you and I think is a challenge. Do we really have confidence in the Lord? Because if we have confidence in the Lord, it's going to affect how we step forward. If we have confidence in the Lord, it's going to change how we react and how we act in our day. There is, forget your notes right now. There is a lot of fear in our world today, is there not? I mean, if you spend any bit of time engaging in news, social media, you are going to hear fear, sometimes panic, in the language of so many people in our culture. Even Christians. Now, I'm not saying we don't need to be concerned and we shouldn't be updated on the events and things that are happening in our world. We should. But friends, where's our confidence? Where's our trust? In a political system? I hope not. I hope our trust and our confidence is in the Lord. I hope it's him that we're eagerly seeking and earnestly seeking. Because a lot of these other sources are just trying to drive fear. Where's our confidence? Hebrews 11, 1 through 6, I think serves as an introduction. It kind of sets us up for these stories of the men and women who demonstrated their faith through their actions. Their lives teach us and show us the example of faith that pleases God and what that looks like. Again, N.T. Wright, share one last thing from him. We find ourselves challenged by the faith which looks at creation and celebrates the Creator, which looks at death and sees the promise of new life beyond, which looks God in the face and trusts him, one that builds on that trust a life which honors and pleases Him. Go back to Johnny for just a moment. Imagine all that planning, all that preparation, but he never took the first step. You see, we can talk about faith. We can know about faith. But are we ready to live it out? Faith is more than just knowing a path. It's more than just belief. Faith is walking it out in our lives. It's trusting God and relying on Him every step that we take. Understanding that He is faithful and He is a rewarder of those who earnestly seek Him. So our point today, our challenge today in this upcoming week is to take that step of faith. Offering God our best. Whether it's our time, our resources, maybe it's a habit that needs to be surrendered. Offer God our best. Like Abel, choose to trust God with something valuable. And like Enoch, earnestly seek Him, believing that He is a rewarder of those who do so. My challenge for you and for me is to identify one specific area, one thing in my life today, this week, that I can tangibly, that I can express my faith, that I can demonstrate my trust in God's promise, even though I may not be able to see clearly the direction of my step. I want us to trust God and to earnestly seek Him in this upcoming week. Not only this week, but for our lives. But start with that step this week.